be how do you go about gathering information? How do you go about um, organizing information into a story? What makes a good story? And how do you uh, uh, write for different kinds of media? And this is something we've been wrestling with in this country, of course, in that we had a strong newspaper tradition here that has now transitioned to online. And that has caused a lot of issues for traditional journalists who've always worked in newspapers as writers and so forth. And we've had to learn new ways of writing, new ways of thinking about news, and new ways of presenting news. I understand now, in your group here, how many of you work in radio? Just raise your hands. How many of you work in radio? Okay, two of you, did I see two? Yeah. And then what did the rest of you work in newspapers? Who works in newspapers? Anybody?
They've not yet started working. These are still at school, yeah. It's only Sharon and Violet who are working with radio now. These other guys are still at school, yeah. They've not yet started.
Yeah. So how many of you are interested in working in radio? How many of you want to work in radio? Yeah. Well, I've been reading, one thing I've discovered about your country is that radio is a very powerful medium and has its own way of, and it has its own way of reaching people. Yeah. And we have at our journalism school here in the United States, we've expanded a lot the idea of audio stories and podcasts, and so it's an excellent way to practice your craft and get your points across. Now, I've been working with Martin off and on for a couple of years now, and mostly on grant applications and such. And lately, I've started to work with him a little bit on journalism school curriculum, classwork, and so forth. And in the future, I hope to find out more about what's going to work for you and what kind of classes will serve your purposes. I really don't have much on my agenda, so maybe if you have questions or if you have areas of interest that you want to talk about, we can do that. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I come from a small town, rural town, farming community in the state of Iowa, which is in the middle of the United States. And I worked in state government for several years before I went back to school and got a journalism degree. And then I went to work for newspapers in medium-sized city, Davenport, Iowa, and then worked for the Chicago Tribune in Chicago, Illinois for about 12 years. And I started teaching there at Northwestern University and then moved on to St. Thomas, where I've been just retired after 23 years. And while at St. Thomas, I also worked at the St. Paul Pioneer Press, which is a fairly large newspaper in the state capital of St. Paul. My specialty is editing and feature writing, and I wrote a lot of sports stories when I was in the business, and worked with my associate Buck Ryan in building the editing program at Medill at Northwestern University, and then I worked in taught the editing class at St. Thomas for about 20 years, and so editing is one of my strong suits. We've been working on for years now new ways to tell stories and new ways to think about stories, and lots of times we found that when students start working as reporters or writers, that they oftentimes don't know how to begin or end a story. And so one of the things we've been working on over the years is sort of a story plan. If I can get it to work here. Here we go. Okay. So let me go back here. And I'm going to show you that a little bit and talk a little bit about it. I shared it with Martin, and I don't know if you can see this very clearly. Yeah. So this is kind of a way to think about storytelling that focuses you on the point of your story. So let's say you've gone out in your reporting, you've interviewed people, you've uh, uh, looked at various documents, perhaps archive material, you've observed things, and this is something that you should practice all the time, is observing as you go around, making notes on things, your impressions, details of the scene where you're at. And now you're back and you're sitting in front of a computer and you have to write your story. And here's where a lot of students get lost. And so the first step is to summarize your story. And we say 30 words or fewer. And this forces you um, to eliminate some of the secondary ideas and come up with the main idea of your story. And this is something you want to always want to do. You want to have a good lead introduction to your story. And sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, somebody else out there. All right. Can you hear me, Martin?
Yes, we are listening to you, Mike.
Yeah, okay. I heard something else going on there. I just wondered if somebody had a question. And you certainly, yeah, you certainly can raise your hand if you have a question about something. So this was something that we found really works well for getting a story and sharpening the cusp of your story. Now, sometimes this will be pretty easy. If you go cover, let's say, a government meeting, and there's a contentious vote on some issue, or let's say you go out into a neighborhood or a village where they're having an issue. The issue will be the main point of your story. But let's say that you've got a lot of ideas thrown at you. This is the first step. And then you always want to think of a story as answering questions for readers, viewers, listeners, whoever your audience is. And if you can think of the three most important questions that readers might ask about your topic or your story, then these are ones you should write down here. Sometimes maybe you only have two if it's a short story, sometimes only one. But you need to think about, like we always say, think like a reader, and come up with those questions that you think readers will ask. I don't know how many times I've read a story in the newspaper or watched this, listened to it on the radio. I listened to a lot of radio news, and found myself asking a question that didn't get answered. And sometimes it might be pretty obvious. You know, it'll say somebody was paid a lot of money for something, and then they don't tell you how much money they were paid, for example. That's an extreme example, but I've seen that happen before. So you want to list those questions that you want to answer. And then we have this approach here, and this may be kind of culturally embedded in us. So I hope you can, it makes sense to you. And the word zinger might be the first one that you find to be a little bit odd. A zinger is sort of a catchy phrase or a statement or something that will make the reader stop and say, what's going on here? What's happening? And this is where a little creativity can come in, but also it might be a straightforward statement of fact. You know, it might be something like, might be something like President Biden announced that he would not run for president today. Now that's going to stop everybody cold in this country and immediately get them into the story. But then they're going to want to know, have their questions answered. Why isn't he running? Who's going to run in his place? These are the questions that you'd want. But sometimes that zinger can be a very clever type of statement, and it can leave people. It can catch their attention, but it might not immediately have meaning to them. They may need to have it explained a little bit, and that would be in what we call the clarifier. So once you have the zinger, then you have the reader's attention, and then you would clarify that to some degree. I'll try to find a story here and show you in a little bit. And then the nut graph is the paragraph in the story. I don't know if you use that term graph, but if you write a story, you have paragraphs. The nut graph is the paragraph that opens the story up, wider issues, cites statistics, outlines the scope of your story. And then from there, you have what we call the accordion. I don't know if any of you play the accordion, the squeeze box. We call it the accordion because it can expand or contract to be as big or as small as you need to tell the story. And here you would take each point of your story. Here's the point, here's the explanation or so forth, and then here's elaboration of that, sometimes in the form of a quote. And then finally, the last point is the echo. And this is the one that I think students seem to have the toughest part. An echo, of course, if you shout into the mountains and your voice comes back to you, one of the ways to complete a story or to finish a story is to echo back to something that was in the beginning of the story. It can be another quote. Sometimes we say, save your second best quote, and in radio would be your second best soundbite, actuality, whatever you call it. Save that for the end, and that would wrap up your story nicely. Now, Martin has this story plan, and so he can share that with you a little bit, and you can start thinking about how to form a story. Now, this is assuming, of course, that you. This is assuming.
I did share with them, Mike. Actually, shared the story plan with them. I took them through the whole thing, so they have it. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And all this is assuming that, of course, you've done your work, your reporting. Sometimes what you'll find is when you list these questions, you find out you need to do more reporting. You need to go back to a source or go back to your notes or something to that effect. So now let me see if I can kind of illustrate this a little bit. And just give me a second here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to a website for the newspaper. And lots of times newspapers are easier to illustrate things than some kinds of other stories. So I'm going to take you to the newspaper site for the Star Tribune, the newspaper here in biggest newspaper here in Minnesota. And we'll see what if we can find a story here that might illustrate what we're talking about. We got to find a news story now, not a let's see here. We have a lot of let's see here. So here's a story. So long plastic air pillows, Amazon shifting to recycled paper filling packages in North America. Okay. And so here's a straightforward statement of fact. I don't know if you're familiar with Amazon. It's the way a lot of people shop in this country. And they basically, everything comes in the mail or through shipping. So here's the lead. Amazon is shifting from plastic air pillows. So this would be like fillers to packaging in North America to recycled paper because it's environmentally sound, and it says paper just works better. Now, that's what we call a pretty straightforward lead. We call it an inverted pyramid lead. A lot of readers will read that and they'll be done with the story. Okay. And then we'll have, in this case, we'll go right to a nut graph. The company said Thursday that it's already replaced 95% of the plastic air pillows with paper filler in North America and is working toward complete removal. And then lots of times about the third paragraph, that's where you want a quote. So here's a quote from Amazon. I don't know if who said it at Amazon, but there you go. And from there we go down to other points that might make sense. So the company's largest plastic package reduction effort will remove 15 billion plastic air pillows. So that's a good point that maybe answers a question for a reader. Almost all customer deliveries for Prime Day this year, which happens next month. Now, this is all, I don't know if you know anything about Prime Day, but this is just American decadence, where everybody gets deals and buys a bunch of stuff on Prime Day. So, but you can see how this works. And then it goes down to less important information and so forth. So this we'll call an inverted pyramid story. So let's look at another one here. Travel for the 50+ crowd, how to keep roaming at your age. And here we have a picture of two people. And here's your lead. Among the many people taking off on summer road trip or jetting off to popular destinations like Europe or Florida, you'll likely see some gray hair. So that's what we call kind of a zinger, You'll likely see some gray hair. So that might, people say, what's going on here?
Gray hair?
And then we have the clarifier. Older travelers have returned to post-pandemic travel, especially international travel, with gusto. I don't know if you know what gusto is, and it's a term like for excitement. They tend to fly more and spend more money. So here's your clarifier right here in this graph. We got the likely gray hair. There's your zinger. Here's your clarifier. And then the nut graph. While aging doesn't stop people from traveling, more aches and ailments may reshape their travel habits. They may want to rent an electric instead of a traditional bike, for instance, or opt for lodging without stairs. And then a quote. And then here's first point, answer the question. How many people are we talking about? 62 million people age 65 plus make up 18% of the US population. Okay. Older adults may travel more because they tend to be empty nesters. Okay, so there's another point. Why do they travel? More likely to have higher incomes, travel internationally, visit small towns. A survey found that about 2/3 of Americans age 50 plus plan to travel this year. How many are we talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, and then on down there. And then we get into some background information. Then we start working on various points. Mobility challenges. So older travelers are going to have mobility issues. And so here's a point that now is explained, and it talks about the airlines and what the airlines are doing to make it easier for people. And then we have a wheelchair-bound person from Little Falls, Minnesota, and what problems he faces. Traveling with dementia. What about people who are a little bit losing it a little bit mentally? And so it talks about 7 million Americans with Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia, and about travel with them. And it goes through and explains that point. And then some travel hacks. Avoid flying on holidays and weekends and so forth. Other airport assistance. So somebody reading this story, somebody my age, which is ancient, somebody my age is going to read this story, and they're going to get a lot of these questions answered. He has a sunflower lanyard to discreetly notify others of his condition. Okay, this is somebody who has a little bit of dementia. Okay, and it goes on to talk more about that. What would make a difference for the Goldsteins? Making strides. And then it talks about airport improvements, quiet rooms. So this is a long story. And And then as an echo, it doesn't really have a really strong echo. It's doing many things that are starting to act with services that are responsive to people's needs. Lots of travelers have mobility, hearing, vision, and speaking limitation. It talks to the broader traveler population, so it echoes back to the beginning, the aging traveler. So here's an example of a story like that. I'm going to send that link to Martin here. Let's see if I can find my, here we go. I'll send it to Martin, and you could look at it later and see what I am, what I'm talking about. There we go. So I'll send that to Martin. You can look at it later. And so that's what I'm talking about, kind of with story form. And again, a lot of this depends on how much reporting you've done and so forth. And we also have something about how to come up with clever beginnings for your story. In radio, I think this is really important, that you have that sort of zinger, that sort of catchy lead that's going to stop people, get people to listen. I don't know how it is in your country, but a lot of people turn on the radio in the United States as sort of a companion. They'll have the radio on and have music on, or they'll have the news, they have a lot of talk shows, podcasts. There's many different kinds of things, but they won't be paying attention necessarily, close attention, even if they're in a captive place, like in their automobile. People listen to the radio all the time in their automobiles in this country. And so it's really important to come up with something that's going to make them start to listen. And if you go to really good radio reporters who do radio stories, you'll find that they work on this a lot. Good place to go for that, of course, would be in this country, would be National Public Radio. And I had the good fortune to work with a really good reporter who was great at coming up with these kind of stories. And let me see if I can find one of her stories here. Okay. Well, that's not a good example there. Hold on just a second, folks.
Okay.
Okay. Let me see if I can listen to this. I'll see if I can share this with you, and so you can listen to it. Okay. Now, I don't know if you can hear this or not.
As the economy picks up across the state, some groups continue to battle higher than average unemployment.
Can you hear that?
Yes, we can, Mike. Yes, we can.
You can?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
The Somali-born population has an unemployment rate that's about 3 times that of the general population. Some Somali community leaders are concerned that the lack of opportunities can fuel despair, especially among young people. Sasha Aslanian has our report.
In February of this year, as the White House was holding a conference about countering violent extremism, the Confederation of Somali Community in Minnesota held a news conference at the Brian Coyle Center in Minneapolis. Executive Director Mohammed Noor talked about the social problems that he said can fuel sympathy for international extremism.
We have the highest unemployment rate than any other groups, including the newcomers, almost 30%. Nobody's talking about that.
Census numbers show of Minnesota's 5 largest immigrant groups, Somali unemployment is the highest. More than half live in poverty. Of course, the number of young people who have joined ISIS represents a small fraction of the Somali community, but unemployment and lack of opportunities are serious concerns. Noor's challenge to address the problem was partially answered this week. Minneapolis and Hennepin County sponsored a hiring and training fair at the Brian Coyle Community Center in the heart of the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. It's not the first job fair in this largely Somali neighborhood, but city officials say they worked hard to get the word out in the community, and they got twice as many job seekers as last year. 20-year-old Kadra Jama says she's been looking for work for a year.
Oh, I applied for Kmart, Walmart, and Mall of America, different job, but still I didn't get the call, or they didn't hire me.
27-year-old Mohammed Abu Bakr moved to Minnesota from Tennessee a month ago, but he says he's only been able to find 2 days worth of temp.
Okay, so you can kind of get the idea there of you know, how she started her story with this idea of what might be not necessarily exciting, but something that will stop you in your tracks, and that is that of all the people in Minnesota, Somali residents have the highest unemployment. So that's, you know, that's sort of an interesting statement. It's something that you don't hear every day, even though it's a fairly straightforward type of lead. And then she works her way through explaining that, and with a nice quote or soundbite in there from one of the Somali leaders of the Somali community. And then the solution to it was the job fair, which is really what the story is about. Why, you know, if you just said, well, they're having a job fair, the Somali community is having a job fair, we really wouldn't interest people. Let's say, well, I'm not Somali and I have a job, so I'm not that interested. But when you start out saying, this group of people have the highest unemployment in the state of Minnesota, then people are likely to stop and ask what, say what, and then want to know more about the topic. And then she goes through and answers the questions, you know, what are we talking about? What level of unemployment are we talking about? What are they doing about it? You know, who's involved? And each point there will introduce, each time she'll introduce a point, and then she'll have an explanation of that point, and then elaboration. And the elaboration is often in the form of a soundbite or a quote of some sort.